Welcome back to Capital Conversations. I'm Marty Owings, and we're here tonight joined by Eric Faught, who is the Executive Director of Minnesotans for a Fair Economy. And right now there's a lot going on in the news, and you're right in the middle of it. So let's talk about a little bit about what's going on with the security guards' efforts to, actually strike right now, a one-day walkout, and then also the, I guess you call it the janitorial services folks, as well as some of the other things you're working on. Let's start with the strike. What's going on there, and why did it happen?
So there's a couple of possible strikes happening right now. There was one that happened today, and that was the
wildcat walkout. What do we call that?
Well, it was a walkout. It was a ULP strike, which is a pretty traditional strike.
You give some warning, and then you tell the management that you're going to be out.
Yeah, there's a written filing of practices that are unfair, that are happening in the workplace. And so these are retail cleaning workers who clean Target stores and other stores, who have been working together for about 3 years now to really kind of look at the conditions that they're working in.
Let's talk about those
sure.
before we get too far into what's going on right now.
Right.
In some of your press releases, you've mentioned things like, and obviously some of the spokespeople have mentioned extra long hours without compensation, sometimes being asked to, work, I guess, under the, I don't want to mischaracterize
Sure.
it, but being asked to work without any kind of compensation in terms of the wage scale or whatever. And so what are we talking about when we say unfair labor practices?
So there's a lot of alarming things that are happening with a lot of these workers that just recently one of the contractors, now these are workers that work with contract companies, so they're subcontract
like
employees.
Marsden or whoever
Right.
the contract company is.
Diversified is one of the largest ones involved here, and there was actually just a settlement for $675,000 in a class action. And in that lawsuit, the workers stated that they were working up to 80 hours a week without overtime pay.
Right.
And a lot of what was happening was that the workers were going in 7 days a week, or being forced to go in 7 days a week. They would be only punching in 6 days a week on their own time card, and then would punch in a ghost time card on the 7th day. And so they weren't getting paid for all of the hours that they were working, and they weren't getting paid overtime. So that was just one of the things. Another 25 OSHA complaints were filed against Diversified for workers that have claimed that they're being locked in stores overnight. And so if they work at a Target store, the doors are locked from the outside and the inside, so you can't actually get out of the store. And in order to get out of the store, you have to call a manager for them to open the door for you. And the manager is not always on site. So a lot of those kind of issues, safety concerns, training concerns in these workplaces. And we believe that, obviously, there are a lot of
people locking them in aren't familiar with the shirtwaist. Early in the last century, we had a little problem with locking people into factories.
Right, and most recently, there have been, in the last 10 years, fires overseas.
Sure.
In places where they were making clothes for Target, even.
Okay.
And people have died in those kind of situations. So it's not only, disrespectful to these workers, but it's dangerous and it can be life-threatening.
Well, I think it's against the law.
Yeah, I think, we'll see what OSHA and others say, but I think that, so what had happened was...
Well, it is, isn't it? I mean, you can't just lock people in a building, right? I mean, without an exit that they can get out of.
I'm not a lawyer or
assuming that
judge,
you can get out of the, well, they're not imprisoned.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, but assuming I look around a Target store, there's usually a few doors that say you can exit here, but the alarm is going to go off. And that's always open from the inside, but then you have to break the alarm. I suppose you don't consider that being an access point?
We've also heard reports that that employees have been told if they do that there would be repercussions as well. Because then you have to have the fire department come, and there's a fee apparently in some cases. And so the worker would be told that they have to pay that fee or would be terminated or something along those lines.
So just to dive into this a little deeper and get to the workers level, Eric,
Right.
you know, obviously with any kind of group that's going to try to organize, there's probably a lot of fear surrounding this, you know. Maybe they're new immigrants to the country, or they're people who are on the lower economic scale that can't really afford to lose the job, and yet they can't afford to strike because that's going to impact their, you know, providing for their family. Things is, and then some of these people, this is their second or third job, right?
Yeah.
So what are you hearing from the rank and file as far as what types of, you know, issues are they going through?
Well, as you said, I mean, I don't think you go on strike unless it's reached a point where you really need to have the employers come to the table, and that's where these workers are. You know, and like I said, they've tried for 3 years to ask the employers to come to the table and to have a discussion about these concerns, and that hasn't happened. And so we've gotten to that point now where this is happening. And you're right, the workers we're talking about in this situation that are organizing through, say, TOOL, the Center for Workers in the Struggle, these are folks that often are not bilingual, they speak only Spanish, and need to have some sort of interpretation in order to deal with a lot of these issues and need assistance, and certainly can't even afford to shop at Target or open a savings account at U.S. Bank. And so they've reached out, and they're working with a lot of our partners to reach a resolution for all of this.
What are you hearing from management, people at U.S. Bank, Target, others? What's been their response as this, I guess the stakes have been kind of ratcheted up here? I mean, are they just, what are you hearing?
Well, there's an interesting dynamic here, and that is that, especially for the janitorial side of things. So through SEIU Local 26 just resolved, came to a tentative agreement with their janitors, 4,000 janitors that clean Target headquarters, U.S. Bank headquarters in Minneapolis, other large, Ecolab, other large buildings. They reached a tentative agreement, which was also great for the workers, a great contract.
What are some of the details of that?
You know, over a period of time, a 50-cent raise, I believe, and
Is there time off built in there? Do they, if they get sick, do they have to worry about losing their jobs?
No, I
Things
mean,
like that, yeah.
all of that would be protected because they're, you know, in a bargaining unit, and
Sure.
they have a contract, which is different than these retail cleaning workers who are non-union
Right.
and don't have any representation right now. But what's also interesting is, so if you consider that Target headquarters is being cleaned by these janitors through Local 26, the retail cleaners that are cleaning the Target stores, you know, are making $8 an hour, somewhere in that range, about average. And what Target is saying, and what other U.S. Bank would say, I would imagine, is that you know, we subcontract this, and we don't have, you know, that is the issue for the contractor to deal with. But the reality is that there are responsible contractors out there. We know it because we've seen them settle a contract in recent days. So Diversified is not the only option for Target to hire to clean 600 stores, which it does,
Yeah.
with low-wage workers that can't afford to shop at Target. So Minnesotans really expect more of Target, especially because they're headquartered here. We helped, as Minnesotans, build the company, and it's really important for them to take responsibility and take a leadership position. We really believe that Target could, if they wanted to, really step up and say, this isn't right, not only for our stores, but for our entire industry. And Target's in a leadership position to do that.
Well, we've heard a lot about, you know, the union side of the argument. Let's talk a little bit about what Target and others might say, and obviously there are many, many Minnesotans that are also shareholders, and they might say, well, if you know, the company's trying to keep its costs down by hiring, you know, lower wage workers to do these jobs, or contracting through people who can do it for a lower cost, what's wrong with that?
Well, it's not Minnesotan. You know, it's not in line with our Minnesota values. And at the end of the day, you know, again, U.S. Bank and Target especially, these two companies that have roots here and are homegrown Minnesota companies, but also Wells Fargo, who has a significant presence in Minnesota, have the ability to say that, you know, we're going to do things differently. And Target has. On how many different levels have they said we're going to do things differently? And they invest in the community, and they do many different things. And here's another opportunity for them to say, you know, we really want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, that we're treating people with dignity and respect. And I would hope that shareholders, especially shareholders that are located in Minnesota, would say, this is not really something that we should do for our neighbors.
Well, let's just get right down to it. You mentioned in your press release, Target CEO Greg Steinhoffel's, salary at $19.3 million in compensation. There's probably another, who knows how many in bonuses and perks and things like that. So you've got an axe to grind with CEO pay, first of all, it sounds like, and you're comparing it to, what's on the other end of the spectrum with this, with the way the workers are being treated. Where did you expect, what do you expect from that? How do you?
Well, I would say that,
Why were you pointing it out? Why were you
Sure.
highlighting it?
I mean, I think that if Mr. Steinhoffel believes, or the shareholders of Target believe that he is worth $20 million a year, congratulations, Mr. Steinhoffel. But we do not reach that level of a salary on an annual basis without making sacrifices on some end of the spectrum. And generally, we know, especially in most recent history, that where the sacrifices are generally made is on the low end of the spectrum. Not just the folks that are employed by Target in their stores, but now we are seeing this whole new subcontracting part of the industry, which is being used for a number of reasons, mostly to cut costs, but also to cut liability and to cut other difficulties that they might see that. And so the way that we reach that $9,000 an hour, I think it is, compared to $8 an hour.
You've got it all figured out.
There are cuts that are made, and there are budget items that are brought down to a very minuscule level. And the real reality of that is real Minnesota families are really struggling as a result.
What about some of the arguments that, well, let's look at the systemic issues. I mean, why not talk about that a little bit? Because here, on one hand, you've got the situation that you're talking about, but, it seems like you're addressing symptoms when there's a disease at work, and it might be, this whole lack of, I would say equity and fairness in the wage system. So if the only path to a living wage is to strike and form unions, you can't rely on the benevolence of the corporation or whatever. Well, isn't that a societal problem beyond Steinhoffel's control? Certainly, the shareholders are demanding and putting the pressure on the corporation to lower costs. How would you expect them to react?
Well, I would say two things.
It's a long way to get at a question. Yeah,
it's fine. I would say two things. One thing being that, again, I do think that Minnesota is different. Minnesota is a different place. This is not Wall Street. This is a whole, we really take ownership of our neighborhoods and our cities and our communities, and making sure that everyone is given a fair shake. I think that's the Minnesota values that I know. And so I think Mr. Steinhoffel, as part of that, has, again, an obligation to be a leader. But also I would say that we aren't just looking at this one issue. We're not just looking at strikes. I think this week we're doing an entire week of action, is what we're calling it. And both labor unions, but also faith-based organizations and community groups that are all part of Minnesotans for a Fair Economy have come together and said, we see what is happening here. And what is happening here is that wealth is being extracted. And it's being extracted mostly by Target.
Someone's getting rich.
Target, Wells Fargo, and U.S. Bank.
Right.
They're getting very rich.
Right.
They're doing very well.
Yeah.
The recession is over. The recovery is there for them. They're in the black. The reality is, for many Minnesotans today, that there has been no recovery. And the reason that's true is because these companies have failed Minnesotans. And they have failed to say, we want to take care of all of our communities. We want to invest in our communities instead of taking the wealth out. If you look at the foreclosure crisis in this state, it's a statewide problem. It's not just in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
It's really hitting North Minneapolis and other areas of the Twin Cities really hard, but it's also hitting Faribault, and it's hitting Moorhead and other places. This is something that the banks can fix today.
Yeah.
And they're not. And so we're bringing a legislative package.
So you're trying to connect all these issues,
Yeah.
you're working with organizations
Right.
beyond your own, like Isaiah or other community organizations that are trying to address the results. I mean, you know, the reason I called it a symptom is
Sure.
because there's so many other issues like foreclosure, job loss, you know, medical costs, all those things that seem connected.
And they are all connected. And we have a broad alliance of groups, like Isaiah
Right.
is a strong partner, as is Take Action Minnesota, you know,
Dan
and a
McGrath.
number of, as I said, labor unions, SEIU, and the AFL-CIO, and UFCW, and many others. You know, Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, which is working on housing
Yeah, yeah.
issues. So all of these organizations have come together and have said, we want to build a Minnesota that works for everybody. And to do that, we have to look at where the problem is lying.
Sure.
And it's lying there.
Well, here you are up in this place,
Right.
which no doubt is one of the keys to maybe getting at some of those issues. What are you doing up here, working with, what kind of action do you have going on with legislators to address some of the issues you just brought up?
Right. We're working really hard on what we're calling a Homeowners Bill of Rights, which is comprehensive foreclosure legislation. It's modeled over after legislation in California and other states that have been very successful in stemming the foreclosure crisis there. And it calls for mandatory mediation, among other components of the bill.
An end to dual tracking.
An end to dual tracking, exactly, and single right of contact. So if you're in a process of foreclosure, you know who to call tomorrow
Yeah.
to start and to discuss the process. These are really key things for Minnesota homeowners that have been really victimized by a system that is really set up against them. So we brought that here, and Representative Freiberg has championed it as the lead author in the House. And tomorrow, we're pleased that Senator Torres Ray has joined us as the lead author in the Senate. And we're going to have a number of clergy here, and we're going to be talking about the crisis and keeping on moving it forward. So it's moving through the committees in the House, and we'll be going through the committees in the Senate real soon.
Well, up here, they're fond of talking a lot about unions, and, you know, in the last couple of legislative sessions where it was dominated by the GOP, they talked about ways to sort of marginalize or prevent unions from what they call, quote, hurting business in Minnesota and things like that. Probably not in keeping with your ideology, but certainly an argument had been made by them, a la Scott Walker in Wisconsin and some of the things like that about schools. Matter of fact, we just had Representative Sandra Erickson say that she didn't favor daycares unionizing, and it might not be the right fit for everybody. Would you stipulate to that there may be daycare providers out there who, you know, don't want to pay the union dues for the protections or whatever that they might be afforded under?
I would say that is certainly possible. I think we did see a number of providers who said that quite clearly when this was discussed in 2011.
Yeah.
I do think that, you know, it is important. It's really interesting as
Well,
an
let's just cut
aside.
to this chase. Let's just
Sure.
go right to it, Eric. Where are you winning and where are you getting your behind kicked? I mean, honest to God, let's just lay it on the line. Where are you winning this union? Because it seems to me like we get lawmakers up here that say, the unions, that's a thing of the past, where, you know, they're no longer effective, they don't work, and then you get some union people up here, including, you know, workers, rank and file, who really want, you know, who are really saying, we're struggling, you know, they're right, we are losing the fight, but we're not gonna go out, you know, without a swing, or what's going on?
Well, I mean,
Break it down for the folks out
you
there.
know, there was an opportunity, there was a push
Yeah.
to have right-to-work legislation
Right.
in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And that was overwhelmingly rejected and pushed back and said, this is not the time and it's not going to work. And I think you saw people from all over the state fill this Capitol and say that's
But they
just not
did
going
it
to
in
happen here.
Wisconsin, and it didn't help, right?
Right. Well, but you know, what the reality is. I do think Minnesota is different than Wisconsin, and I do think that, you know, what's interesting is I don't know what happened that the right to a safe and equitable workplace, how it's become a partisan issue. It never was before. It only has in the recent years. And I think that, I don't know that that's going to stay in place for much longer.
So just to wrap up here, my producer's telling us we're just about out of time.
Okay.
But when you get to the bottom line, I mean, you see legislation that's maybe a carbon copy or maybe ALEC bills that are being introduced. There's outside forces at work. There's money being worked. The GOP is threatening, or not the GOP, but an outside organization to spend, millions of dollars if the gay marriage issue becomes an issue up here to defeat its own legislators. GOP.
Well, we could spend another show about that.
Yeah, no, I know. But
Exactly.
so you say it's not Minnesota.
Right.
You talked a lot about Minnesota's
Right.
culture, Minnesota. But so where's all this coming from? What's going on?
I think it is a lot of out-of-state special interests. I do think, ALEC certainly brought us the voter ID legislation that I was very involved in defeating personally. And I think that, voters saw right through all of that. I think it was true on the other amendment as well.
Were you
on the
surprised?
marriage
Because
amendment.
polling wasn't with you up until the very last minute on the voter ID thing. Gay marriage was a little closer, but
We were hearing throughout the state that there was movement.
see.
And we saw it happening, in the last few months. I mean, it wasn't, 6 months before. But in the weeks heading up, we were, we weren't overconfident, but we were seeing that it was shifting. And so I wasn't surprised on election night. I was very excited, but I wasn't surprised.
well, good to have you with us, Eric Fott, and appreciate your time tonight and your candidness about the issues.
You bet.
All
My
right.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at MN Capital News. That's MN Cap News on Twitter, or on Facebook at Minnesota Capital Conversations. I would like to thank our guest who was on earlier tonight, GOP Representative Sandra Erickson, for joining us, and of course our guest now, Eric Fott, who is with Minnesotans for a Fair Economy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's the communication director there. If they want to learn more about Minnesotans for a Fair Economy, where should they go?
Go to our website, mnfaireconomy.org.
All right, for more political news and analysis from the Capitol, join us at KFAI 90.3 FM on the dial every morning at 7:40 a.m., or at least every Wednesday when I'm on. Appreciate you. Appreciate you tuning into that. We had production assistance tonight from Cliff Dahlberg. He was our media specialist. And our producer is Catherine Loudenslager. I'm Marty Owings. For Paul Gardner, who couldn't be here tonight, we'll see you next week at the Capitol. So long, everybody.